Hello again. This week's topic is coverage of agriculture and food, which is a vast topic. And as I was thinking about the readings and the video for this week and some of the things I wanted to say, it struck me that you could actually teach a whole course on coverage of agriculture and food. Of course, you could say the same of healthcare or education or some of the other topics. I think, by its nature, this is a survey course, and so we tend to compress a lot of material into weekly units. Agriculture and food is immense because it ranges from issues of global trade and vast factory farms and ranches of thousands of acres to storefront restaurants and gourmet shops in the major cities, and to an enormous growing interest in cooking and in learning the recipes and the culture of other cuisines. And so there's a great amount of opportunity for people who are interested in food and also beverage to have successful careers. And there's also a lot of material for us to assess in trying to decide how good a job the press is doing. To start at the high end, or the big end, the broad end, I have this notion that a lot of people in New York City, whatever their interest in food, don't know a great deal about agriculture and don't think about it a great deal. When we think of agriculture, to the extent that we think of agriculture, we think of the amber waves of grain in the Midwest and the oranges and grapefruits growing in Florida and Texas, and all the vegetables that come to us from the Southwest and California. And I think what we sometimes fail to see is that not very far from New York City, there is significant farming going on. If you go out to the west and the south of New Jersey, there are many, many farms. A bizarre piece of information I picked up along the way is that New Jersey leads all 50 states in the production of eggplants. Like, who would have thought that? But beyond that, there are farms throughout New Jersey. There are quite a few that were started by Mexican immigrants who grow vegetables and spices that we associate with Mexico and its cuisines, and which they sell to the vast Mexican population in the metropolitan area. If you go 45 or 50 miles northwest of New York City to Orange County, New York, there's an area there famous for its black soil and the onions that are grown there. And there are times of year when the onions are being harvested, when migrant workers come in and set up in temporary camps and send their children to schools. And on a small scale, some of the issues we're familiar with, migrant workers and their treatment, happen on our doorstep. If you go farther north, New York State for decades has been one of the nation's leading producer of apples, and it's also a major dairy state, known for its milk and cheese. And for decades now ended, the eastern end of Long Island, Suffolk County, was known for its potatoes. And there was a long period when Long Island potatoes were as well known as Idaho potatoes and Maine potatoes are today. Most of those farms are gone. They've either been converted into housing or, in some cases, into vineyards. But agriculture is never very far from us, and it affects the variety of food that's available to us, the price of food, and in a very broad sense, very important issues like the environment, climate change, international trade, and who are our partners, and with whom do we have hostile relationships. And this is true. I sort of have a US-centric view on this, but this is a major issue in the trade war or wars going on now between China and Australia, where China is a major importer of many things from Australia, and it's been cracking down on them because of criticisms the Australian government has made of Chinese policy. I think that, when you think about climate change and its impact, one very notable thing to me is that there is now farming in Greenland. And, that's hard to imagine. The Greenland of 30 years ago was covered with ice, and there's now successful growth there of oats and barley and winter wheat. So all of these issues come together on many different fronts. There are parts of the world experiencing drought. There are parts of the world experiencing famine. Many of these conditions are made worse in the pandemic. But I think that there's a lot of opportunity, even here in New York, to do some good articles on agriculture, to find local experts, and to take advantage of the internet to have access to stories of things that are going on around the world. Agriculture aside, I think the nature of food supply and how food gets to us and how safe the growing of the food is and how safe the transport of the food is and the storage of the food, the delivery systems, the use of truck and rail, all the way through to the wholesale markets. And New York is famous for its meat market, its fish market, and its vegetable market. Those used to be scattered. The meat market was on the Lower West Side of Manhattan. The Fulton Fish Street Market was on the East River. Those and the very large fruit and vegetable market are now all up in the Hunts Point area of the Bronx. But there's stories there about who works there, how easy it is to get a job, how safe it is, what are the salaries available, and so on. And then you can follow food down to the retail level, to everything from supermarkets and which neighborhoods have them and which do not, and what the alternative to supermarkets are and where the best prices are available for food and the best quality of food. It's a very, very rich and fertile area, and I think has always been of great interest to readers and viewers and consumers of news, and that's why we see recipe columns in the papers and websites, why cooking shows have been so successful. And I think that there's a great opportunity, if you're interested and have some knowledge, to do some very creative journalism. It's very hard if you don't have any knowledge. And I've never really written about food per se. My wife years ago was trained as a baker and a chef, and so we were able to do some fun articles together. And I, at the time, gained a lot of knowledge of certain beverages, of beer, of Scottish malt whiskey. And through my curiosity and a lot of reading and studying, I was able to develop some expertise and do some very good articles about that. I think that for many of you, just considering your families and what they eat, literally what they bring to the table and where they buy it and how they prepare it, could contain information that other people would be interested in. And I know at this time of year, and certainly the pandemic has changed everything, but Thanksgiving was always a great opportunity to think about the sort of the traditions of the American Thanksgiving and where they came from, and now how different immigrant groups adapt them. Some, of course, ignore them, but some adapt them and bring their own spicing to traditional dishes like a roast turkey. Others bring together meals of food from their cultures and the tradition American meals. And I think that there's some really good stories to tell there about ethnic holidays and multi-ethnic holidays and what's available in restaurants and what's available in food stores. One thing that has always fascinated me is an amazing number of American homes for the Thanksgiving holiday roast a turkey. And in my experience, almost nobody ever roasts a turkey except at Thanksgiving. So I think about this both from a food point of view and also from a farming point of view, and what it must be like if you run a turkey farm. I think they're called farms and not ranches, but if you breed and grow turkeys and you're going to have enormous sales in anticipation of one holiday, and then the rest of the year you're basically going to be dealing with suppliers who roast turkey to sell in delicatessens and at deli counters, where turkey is, I think, the most widely sold American cold cut. But if you think about something like that, or something like cranberries, like so many families have some form of cranberry on the Thanksgiving table and then don't eat it for the rest of the year. I think there's some good business stories out there. I think if you're interested in or have had some involvement in the armed forces, thinking about food there and how do you prepare food on that scale, how do you obtain the food, how do you transport the food, how do you cook for vast numbers of people. There's some very good stories in that as well. And even to extend that a little, there's a booming market for pet food and many new varieties of it, and organic foods and crafts foods and raw, uncooked foods. If you're interested in zoos and zoo animals, it's interesting to think about how much food is consumed each day at the Bronx Zoo, and what are the different types of food, and where does it all come from, and how where do they get it, who serves them, and so on. And if you were interested in that and can figure out who the people are who would have that knowledge, I think there's some good stories to be done on that front. So I think that coverage of food is very popular, and it also ranges across a huge gamut of possible topics. A major change that I've seen in American journalism in the last 20, 25 years has been there's much more emphasis on what's affordable and tasty, and small restaurants that pop up in neighborhoods, and how different cuisines travel. And if a new immigrant group moves into a neighborhood, family starts a restaurant. If it succeeds, similar restaurants open up. Sometimes they're just serving the community, but then if they develop a reputation, people come from all over to eat there. And you can sort of chart the progress of food through different communities. You can go into local supermarkets and see, how widespread are Asian vegetables or Mexican vegetables. And you used to have to go to specialty stores, but now you can find them at many, many supermarkets. I think that there's also been very considerable interest in food workers and the conditions they work under, and is it safe? How well paid are they? What protections do they have? Are they unionized? Are they regulated? If we go back 120 years to Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, which is about the meat packing industry in Chicago, the quantity of gross detail in that book led to huge outcries and actually led to federal regulations and legislation about food safety. And there are lessons to be learned in that, in thinking about foods today and what foods come to us. And just to give you one offbeat example, there are still several live slaughterhouses in New York City where there are certain populations that prefer to buy chicken and duck, sometimes turkey, live and have it killed on the spot. There are places that provide rabbit and lamb, which are popular in some cultures, and goat. And there's a whole array of stories that might grow out of that. Who works there? How safe are they? How regulated are they? What is it like to have one as a neighbor? Because it must smell awful. When I was a student at CCNY, right where you got off the bus on Amsterdam Avenue to go into the campus, there was a slaughterhouse. And you could smell it for blocks away. And we thought, oh my God, what must it be like to live here? But some of those slaughterhouses are still there in the boroughs and could be very good stories for people looking to do community journalism. But this is not a how-to class. This is more a class of press criticism and thinking about how well they do the job. So, I think I would ask you to look at the news coverage as a whole and see, does it speak to you? Does it speak to people you know? Does it give them information they need about how to eat well, how to eat affordably, how to eat safely, what choices are available, and how to make good choices for you, for your children, in some cases for your pets? Are there regulations you wish were in place that are written about? Are there ones that are ignored? And so there's a lot to think about here and a lot to examine. And if you pick up one of the big newspapers like the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post, virtually every day there will be stories about food. Some might be on the front page, some will be in specialty columns, like the Times has developed sort of a huge franchise in providing recipes, and it keeps adding more and more cooks and bakers and bartenders to its roster of people, because it's finding there's a large appetite in its readership for that kind of information. But I think every time we hear that there's a breakout of some disease, whether it's a virus, whether it's E. coli infection that seems to arise from romaine lettuce at least once a year, I think I would say I feel like the news media are obligated to cover stories like that there's a public interest and a public safety and public health considerations. And so I would hold them to a fairly high standard and say, are they providing what we need to know? Are they helping their readership, whatever that readership is, make good choices? So in the folder this week, in addition to the video on factory farming and some of the issues that it raises, there is material about what people call food deserts, which are neighborhoods or areas where it's hard to get good food. Areas that are called food swamps, where there's an abundance of unhealthy food. And I think I was going to say there's a lot to chew on. Yes, there's a lot to chew and there's a lot to consume, a lot to swallow. And I think that, I can be fairly confident that however much attention you pay or don't pay to international trade, that you spend a certain amount of time every week thinking about food and what you might want to eat, where you would find it, how you might prepare it, how you might help, how you might learn to do something you don't know. And so I would say to you, hold the news media accountable. See if you can find the material you're interested in, search widely, read widely, and I think you will be both impressed with what's out there and also aware of things that you wish were out there that are not so well covered or not so easy to find. And I hope you enjoy the material. If you come across articles that you would like to share with me or with the rest of the class, please send them to me. And within the context of the pandemic, I hope that you are able with your loved ones to have some sort of Thanksgiving meal, if you so choose. We're trying to figure out how to do that with our daughter, who lives 150 miles away. And don't know, Zoom meals don't seem that appetizing, but I think that's what we're looking at, maybe simultaneously making the same dishes and consuming them. Kind of bizarre and not very satisfying, but the best, safest thing we can do. So I hope you are staying safe and being sensible, and at the same time having some satisfaction in planning for the holidays and thinking about the food associated with it and other food issues. And I'd be very happy to hear from you or talk to you about any of these issues. So be well and be safe, and I will talk to you again soon. Thanks.